Hello there once again. Boxing is the sport to be debated on the best of all time. And on tonight's programme, I guess, have an hour. Yes, just an hour to debate the best pound-for-pound boxer of all time. Can they do it? Well, it might be difficult. But I'm delighted to say I'm joined once again by Barry McGuigan. In the ring, he was known as the Clonus Cyclone, the world featherweight champion back in the mid-80s, now Sky Sports boxing analyst. Colin Hart from The Sun, the boxing correspondent of The Sun. Colin's been following the game and all the big fights around the world for the better part of 30 years. Welcome, Colin. And also, we're joined by Reg Guttridge, a most distinguished broadcaster, radio and mainly on television. And Reg, like Colin, has seen pretty much all there is to see in this game in the past 30 years and more. It's an argument that will certainly fill debating chambers.
30, unfortunately.
It's an argument that would fill debating chambers from here till the end of the century, Reg. But to start with, how are we going to define what is the finest pound for pound?
Usually not necessarily on records. I'm not big on statistics. It's who they fought. That's what I consider is the best fighter. Who's handled the best fighters of his time, not ducked and dived his way through, not him personally necessarily, but the promotion or the management. So I know that what mine is going to be, and I never have any problem with mine. Do you want to hear it now?
No, we'll get into that in just a moment.
All right.
But Colin, how important is it that you're picking on men who had a very competitive division in which they fought at the time?
Yes, it is very difficult, obviously, to span a century and come up with the best pound for pound. There's so many aspects to this business. You've got to assume that every fighter you assess was in his prime. And as Reggie said, that they fought the best there was around. Now, very often they didn't, through no fault of their own, because their management sidetracked certain people. That's why I find it amusing when people say, oh, I wish we had the old days back, where we had 8 champions and we knew where we were. Those 8 champions were manipulated, and shall I say, a lot of challengers were kept out of the picture because they were too dangerous. Whereas today, with so many titles, everybody gets a shot and everybody makes money. It is a difficult thing to do, but you've got to take into account style, punching power, technique. All these things come into it.
For me, that's the very essence of the best fighter of all time. The guy that could do everything. There's never been the perfect fighter born yet. A guy that can box, punch, move around, digest and take a punch, dish it out, dig down when the going gets tough. There's never been the perfect fighter yet. But I know the one
I'm going to be
exactly.
Going to be close,
And the one I'm going for too is probably
I don't know what you're going for. You'd better be good.
I'm not going to tell you yet.
Yeah.
But
well, we're all boxing people, and I know what we're all going to go for, because everybody in boxing usually comes up with one man. But then we will see.
All right, the contenders, and if we can maybe start, Reg, by going back to the period of the First World War, and especially in the lighter weight divisions at that time, there are some men whose records stand comparison with anything in history. Likes,
yeah, as I was saying, not necessarily records, really. It's just, again, and emphasise this, not the guy who's had 200 fights and only lost one. There was a boy called Hal Bagwell that lived in Cheltenham that once held this longest record. Well, that's because his manager and matchmaker was very clever. Decent fighter, but was never near world class. But you would think he was better than any of the modern ones, wouldn't you? And I'm only going back to the 40s. Hal Bagwell. I would like to nominate Ted Kid Lewis and Jimmy Wilde, two of our fighters. Ted Kid Lewis in particular, because he fought at so many weights. Although Jimmy Wilde, and my grandfather seconded him a few times, so I know a little bit about him, he would have probably won 5 world championships, at least 4. Strawweight, light fly, fly, superfly and bantam. He would have probably won all 3. He was incredible, that man. But a little bit freakish in many ways. And sometimes with flyweights, we never give them the just due because they dance around like mosquitoes and we can't really always see how good they are. Ted Kid Lewis went to the States, beat the best, had an incredible record, won the World Welterweight Championship, had a lot of no-decision contests that he actually won, 20-year career. I would have backed him in the British fighter to be the best all-round, with Jimmy Wilde maybe a close second.
Did he make money out of boxing?
Yeah, he gave it away, threw it away all in the East End mostly, just to, not gambling. I know his son very well, Morton Lewis, whose godfather happens to was Charlie Chaplin. No, Lewis didn't mind it, though. He spent his money happily, rather like Muhammad Ali does. He throws it away and enjoys it, you know. But he was always looked after by his son anyway, so he was never a broke fighter. He tried managing a little bit, Ted Kid Lewis, but it never worked for him because he couldn't understand why his boys couldn't do what he did, and that's always a problem with the great fighters.
Jimmy Wilde, Colin.
Yes, a freak. I mean, they called him the Mighty Atom. I mean, he could knock out lightweights, a tremendous puncher. And he held the world flyweight title for 7 years. He didn't fight that many times for the title because there was nobody good enough to put in there with him. That's why he had very few world championship fights, but obviously, you know, one of the all-time greats. And I certainly would put Ted Kid Lewis up there as well. Maybe I'm also biased because I'm an East Londoner, and I grew up listening to my father tell me about the exploits of Ted Kid Lewis. And in 1915, when Kid Lewis came back from America, having won the world welterweight title, I think my father then was about 9 years of age, and he was running behind Ted Kid Lewis's car, which was an unheard of thing in those days for a fighter to have a car, going through East London throwing pennies to the kids, and my father was one of the kids picking up the pennies.
More than pennies, I think, actually. According to Morton, his son.
Yeah.
Some of the men we'll talk about are big personalities as well as their obvious
And he was
genius
a show-off
in
too,
sports.
actually, Ted Kid Lewis.
Was he? Yeah.
He could handle himself chatting, and he feared nobody all the time.
He used
Don't
to
worry
knock out
about him.
heavyweights.
I mean, he'd make Naz
Unbelievable.
Hazim Man. What's his name?
Nassim Ahmed.
the Prince.
The Prince, yeah, Arthur Prince. He would have made him look quiet, you know. He didn't do it in the same way, but I mean, those days they could say their pieces as well. He feared nobody.
They used to
Hands
call-
down, mouth open. You know, Ted Kid Lewis.
What I like about Lewis was he went to America and took on the best
That's
and,
right.
and beat him over there and came back again and defended
Those-
over here. He went to America and took on the guys that could really fight.
How
And-
many
and
fights
also-
did he have with Britain? I mean,
17.
I think it was more than that, actually.
No,
Colin.
17,
Okay,
17 fights with Jack
With
Whitman.
one guy.
And
You'd
Jimmy
think
Wilde.
their punches had been choreographed for them by them, wouldn't you? But they were always blood battles.
Absolutely.
Colin, Leonard is a name that's got certain connotations, especially in the United States, but the first man we're going to talk about, not Ray Leonard. There was another Leonard, that maybe the younger generation of...
His real name was Benny Lena, became Benny Leonard. And of course that was the time in the United States and in Britain where there were so many great Jewish fighters. And he was one, arguably the greatest Jewish fighter who ever lived. He held the world lightweight title, I think I'm right, fellas, 7 years.
7 years.
And nobody could touch him. He had, I mean, nobody could lay a glove on him. He wasn't like Ali, you know, using tremendous speed to avoid punches, but he could feint people
He
out
could
of
parry
their...
punches and block
parry
them and
punches,
slip
block
them.
them, slip them, and feint boxers out their boots.
And he couldn't punch either, Colin, which was interesting.
No,
it wasn't
he-
a banger.
It was just
By the way, it
technically
must have been
brilliant.
the best all-Jewish fight of all time. Ted Kid Lewis beat him and he lost to him. He fought
Yeah.
him twice.
He also...
Kid Lewis and Benny Leonard must have been worth seeing.
Yeah, and so also he won the title, I think, from Lou Tendler. There was another Jewish fighter.
I wasn't there at the time, so I don't remember.
But I mean, this was the era, you know, of the great American immigrant fighters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hungry men.
Hungry men, yes, exactly.
And then there was Mickey Walker, of course. Mickey Walker, one of the greatest fighters of all time, went from welterweight, middleweight, and fought for the light heavy, and almost won the heavyweight title too.
It's extraordinary that you're telling me about these characters from this period who were also versatile
Yeah.
in terms of the weight division that
Well-
they fought in. Physically, how was that possible?
Well, that's a good point, because we were talking off air about how small Walker was. Walker was 5'7",
Absolutely.
but built like he was carved out of marble. Strong wee man, incredibly powerful, and also very cunning. Great tactical fighter.
Yeah, but he was also very tough, I mean, and aggressive. His nickname was the Toy Bulldog. I mean, he'd go for your throat as soon as the bell sounded. But obviously to survive through those weight divisions, from welterweight through... I mean, he fought Sharkey. It wasn't for the world title, actually, Barry. It was Sharkey was the former world champion. But he actually boxed the draw with a heavyweight at 5'7".
Doesn't seem possible. does it?
Absolutely unbelievable.
He's a really in style. He was probably the white version of a Mike Tyson cut down a little bit.
Yeah.
I once shook his hand. It was a great thrill for me. I'd never seen him fight, obviously. And I met him at a dinner, and to see this little cropped-haired man in glasses, and you could still see the strength in him.
Yeah.
He was probably well in his
Little
60s by
powerhouse.
then.
How much of it, Reg, was mental strength? You mentioned there that they had poor backgrounds.
That's
It was
right.
their way of escape.
Nearly all fighters are street people, really. I mean, if you ever get one that's sort of university educated, that's going to be sensational. There are actually one or two in America. Bone Crusher Smith got a degree, and somebody
Well,
else.
Gene
did.
Tunney
And
was...
Gene Tunney allegedly got a degree.
yeah.
Not quite the same. That's another point. But they've come from hard backgrounds. You know, where you've got the whole clutch of of Irish in America at one time with the poverty. Then the Jewish people get it, and then of course the black people came in.
Don't forget the Italians.
And the Italians as well, yeah. It was all the immigrant stuff coming in. They were harder in their lifestyle today, you know.
But Reggie, talking about someone who